Hello, welcome to episode 3 of Off the Bandstand. My name is Christian Wiggs. I'm your host, as always. Today's episode is Thomas Wenglinski, a fantastic piano player here in Austin. He's one of my favorite people in the world to make music with, and also a really great friend. I am always a happier person whenever I'm around him. He has just released a new record, which is called Adjustments Made, that released yesterday on July 15th, and we have a trailer for that record right now. Check it out.
It's hard to see anything else good coming out of this pandemic, so...
Okay, bitch, watch this.
As you can tell from the short clip, it's all super groovy and absolutely worth your time. It's on all the major streaming and online platforms like Amazon, Apple Music, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, all of those good things. And then also on Bandcamp as well, which historically is really great to musicians and benefits musicians the most. So if you're really looking to, maybe download the record and then support musicians, go check them out on Bandcamp. It's thomaswenglinski.bandcamp.com. And we all appreciate you supporting musicians in this time. In this episode, we talk about his composing and arranging styles and how influences kind of make their way into that, but he ultimately emerges with something that is uniquely Thomas, which should be the title of his next record. We're gonna have a talk about that on the next episode. Uniquely Thomas. It's got to be the one. I'm copywriting it now. So anyways, without further ado, I won't talk anymore. We'll let the episode speak for itself. This is episode 3, Thomas Wenglinski. This is Off the Bandstand. Thom-Cat, Thomas Wayne Gretzky, the man with many names. How are you?
I'm just fine. How are you?
I'm good. You shaved. You look different.
Well, you haven't seen me in 4 months in person, just because of all this. So I've gone through a couple shaves.
Sure.
A couple, but
Well, you don't sound any different, so that's nice. The phone calls have been consistent. Your voice is still the same, unless I don't know, you were just secretly smoking a bunch of packs of cigarettes, and then your voice was getting progressively deeper and deeper.
Yeah, well, I've read that that's a great way to build up your immune system to the virus, but I haven't explored that any further than that yet. I haven't taken up smoking yet.
It's a great way to stay in shape, and it's like the namesake of being a jazz musician. So I don't know, maybe give it another thought.
Yeah, I'm always considering new projects. So yeah.
Well, for listeners who are listening, we're recording this before. This is not live. But for listeners who are tuning in, you can already tell episode 3 is a lot more silly and a lot more laid back than other episodes. It's always laid back, but me and Thomas joke around a lot, and so you can probably expect to hear that throughout the entirety of this episode. But Thomas, how are you, man? How have you been?
Oh, I've been all right. I've just been trying to practice and sort of simulate the presence of gigs, which, you get busy enough when you're gigging that you stop feeling the need to practice all that much because you feel like you're getting enough of a workout on your instrument just from the day-to-day
Yeah.
gigging, and then suddenly you have no gigs, and it's like, well, there's an active incentive to just sit down and practice. So I've been doing that um, some more. I've been trying to learn some different tunes and just treat different tunes different ways. But yeah.
You care to share what any of those tunes are that you've been working on, or been thinking of different stuff, or is it close to the chest?
Oh, it's not close to the chest. I mean, a variety of things. "Lazy Bird," the Coltrane tune, is a tune that I never had worked up terribly much, And it's funny. Everyone thinks of 2 or 3 different Coltrane tunes as being just the pinnacle of difficulty for the standard jazz songbook, but there are dozens of songs of his that are equally difficult to Moment's Notice and Giant Steps. So.
Yeah.
So "Lazy Bird" is one that I've been working on. A couple different ballads as well. I think the most significant of those would be "Stars Fell on Alabama." That's a tune that, I had kind of overlooked for a long time until I played it on a gig with a future guest of this podcast, Kenny Williams. And just hearing his presentation of the melody was just very inspiring. So, that's another tune. But, just stuff like that. Just tunes that I'd been meaning to get to at some point and never found time for,
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. I didn't know Kenny sang that one. And also, man, like, you got to put like a spoiler alert when you're going to say like a future guest of the pod. You got to like.
Okay, fair enough. I'm sorry. I don't know how much of this is public. Yeah. Yeah. When I played a gig with Redacted at Redacted on Redacted date. Yeah.
Right.
I'll just start saying Redacted.
Yeah, I'll just like put like a black bar and then like a beep there. So
okay, yeah.
And then it just has a disclaimer that says like tune in every week to find out who he was talking about. We'll make sure to
right. Exactly.
Well, cool, man. And then I guess like where are you in Austin right now?
Yeah, I'm in Austin. I've been here for most of the quarantine. I've gone home a couple times to see family in Houston. But other than that, yeah, I mean, all my stuff is here. To the extent that I still see any friends of mine, in person, of course, like, keeping with best practices and anything, like most of them are here. So, yeah. And I can't say I regret it too much. I mean, I've still gotten to see my family a good amount this summer.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah.
I think what something you were saying too, and it seems to be like a theme that everybody's been saying, of just like how the time off has been nice, but at the same time, it is kind of like a culture shock thing a little bit for us, right? Because it was like such a part of our daily routine. And then like, I mean, you like, we're still having school and everything too. So then that kind of went on. So like, what was that like, right? Like trying to, and not only like, were you in school, you were literally finishing your undergrad. Like it was your graduating semester. You had all this other stuff and like senior recital, and then just like all this hit. So what was that like?
It was pretty weird. I had a bunch of plans for like right after spring break, in late March. For some pretty big ambitious thing. Like my senior recital was supposed to be the Wednesday after spring break. And then that next weekend I was scheduled to play, I was scheduled to lead a sextet date at Monk's, Colin Shook's venue. And I was really excited for all those things. And, so yeah, this all hit that week before spring break, and suddenly it's like, well, none of those things are on the docket anymore. And it was strange. And so playing it out for the rest of the semester in school, I mean, I had a relatively light schedule for my last semester anyway, so it wasn't too gigantic a change for me. I mean, it stunk that we didn't get to have a final jazz orchestra concert.
Yeah.
Which was going to feature Dave Douglas as a guest artist, which was huge. But yeah, I mean, I was still able to do my composition lessons with Dr. John Mills and Dr. Russell Pogorsic and everything. The in-person elements of those wasn't really jeopardized at all, because it basically just consisted of like me showing them what I was working on and them like giving pointers and referring back to different literature and other works for, like tips on how to better approach things. So, and you can do that over the computer anyway with screen sharing and whatnot. The piano lessons were really weird. Because studying with Jeff Helmer for 4 years, you're so used to, because he has 2 pianos set up in his office, and you're just, he comps for you while you play the tune and then a solo, and then you comp for him while he plays a solo, and then he, talks you through some ideas and has you play those ideas over the tune. But we can't really play together over Zoom because there's that like half a second delay. Yeah, so that you can't really interact with that going on in that way anyway. So I basically just had to play with a click track while he sat and listened like this, and that's a little bit intimidating, even after 3.5 years of studying with the guy. It's just such a strange way to have to adapt to all of this, but yeah.
Yeah, I've found that whenever I'm teaching my lessons, because I still teach weekly, is I'll like record their track and then I'll send it to them, and then I'll have them play it on their end and then sing with their track. But like I can count on one hand like how many times people have actually like looked in the camera at me while it's happening. Usually they'll like look at me and they'll just immediately go, oh, nope. And then just like look down, pretend they're reading lyrics or something like that. Because they're just, it's this other weird element where like, and these are students that I've had for years, like 4 or 5 years. But it's that whole thing of like, there's just this, I don't know if like intimacy is like the right word, but there's just like a feeling of like all eyes are on me. And it doesn't matter how long you've known somebody. It's weird now because it's like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And maybe we can just chalk it up to that we have all forgotten how to be social after being in our apartments and being holed up for so long. But
yeah, and it sort of it reinforces the power and beauty of in-person collaboration, cooperation, and just interactions in general. I think. So, yeah. It's gonna be something I think that's weighing heavily on everyone's minds throughout all of this, and certainly be a relief once it's actually over, whenever that happens and whatever it looks like.
Yeah, whenever we get a vaccine or widespread testing, or maybe we don't need any more testing. Some people have been saying, maybe we don't need any.
Yeah,
this is not a political podcast. I'm so sorry. I'll try to refrain, audience members. My
none of it's real if you shut your eyes. It's the age-old trick. But yeah.
Another thing too is that for the past couple episodes, people have been enjoying not only like the talks. Well, I hope at the point that we're recording this, none of them have been released. So I hope that it's not just like everybody's like this is garbage, but people have been enjoying before the conversations a nasty little theme that's been planned beforehand. And I felt like maybe the first person should be you, but we already had something scheduled with Daniel. Sorry, not Dan. Daniel before. But yeah, man. So, ladies and gentlemen, Thomas Wenglinski, the composer and mixing and mastering guru of the Off Bandstand theme song. So, man, did you already have something like lined out for that? Because that was a relatively quick turnaround. I messaged you on Friday, and then by Saturday afternoon, you were like, "Here's the thing." And it was like, boom.
Well, I just, and maybe we'll talk more about this if we get into just like methods of composition in general, but it's like, I always kind of have different like 8-note, just pretty brief melodic motifs in my head. If you're a jazz improviser, that's just like, that's vocabulary.
Sure.
That's just sort of standard stuff. And as long as you're not directly plagiarizing, then it's not too big a deal where those ideas come from.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was just an idea. Like I knew I wanted to do like a sort of um, like a pop funk influence thing, and it was just this sort of 2 bar idea that popped into my head, fit over a pretty standard uh, R&B progression. I figuring out how to pan it out into an 8 bar section by varying it, and then it was just a matter of recording it and putting it to some instruments. And uh, when you have a melody like that that's very rhythmic, you can always like you can just try playing it on piano with 2 hands and see what you play in the left hand, and then you've kind of got your background figures there typically. Like it should just feel natural. And so after that you have a counter melodic part potentially, and once you do that enough times, your brain sort of goes on autopilot in terms of that whole process. So it's just a bunch of try to turn around, I guess. So yeah.
Sorry, I got like a bunch of, and then I like lost what you said. What was that last thing that you said?
Oh, I was just saying, a bunch of trial and error basically is what leads to that kind of turnaround. Like just knowing how to take a melodic idea that's just floating in your head and just pan it out into a bit of a theme, and then support it with a counter melody or a groove.
Yeah.
And if you work with technology like Logic or just any music recording software, just how to lay that down into a track and mix and master it.
Yeah.
So
well, man, it's incredible, and thank you so much for lending your compositional expertise to all of that. Man, I want to make sure to get to like a wide variety of things, because you've got just like so much stuff going on. So one thing before I gloss over this is like you have a brand new single out, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, Watch the Moon, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, correct. Man, yeah. I checked it out. I'm ashamed to say I hadn't checked it out until today, but then I was like, oh yeah, Thomas like released this thing and put it on, and I was like, whoa, like this is like incredible. Like it was just, and like everybody keeps saying, like even with the theme song that you did for this, they were like, man, it's just like, it slaps, like it's a bop, and someone even said that it sounds like a 90s sitcom TV show intro. And I was like,
I get that a lot. Yeah.
I was like, I feel like Thomas would appreciate that. I feel like that's like, at least somewhat in line with like certain things that he thinks his stuff could be lent to. And I tried to.
Well, man, look at all the people who wrote all those TV themes. Like a lot of them were jazz musicians. I mean, Benny Golson himself. I mean, the guy who wrote Stablemates and Whisper Not and all those. Remember Clifford, all those great tunes. What was he doing? Later in his career was writing half of those TV themes. So no, it's perfectly within the stylistic idiom, I think.
Well, and what's probably sad too is that he probably made so much more money writing those short little TV themes that he did like with like all these like incredible tunes. Like I remember Clifford, I think I don't know. I think it's definitely one of my favorite standards. I think just like across the board, it's so great. And by the way, that dude, did you go see him whenever he was doing a thing down in San Marcos? Were you at that concert?
Oh, Texas State. Yeah, I saw that. That was one of the first concerts I saw after moving to Austin, and it was amazing.
Yeah, man. What my favorite thing about that was that he was like, I love to talk a lot, and I love to tell stories, and my wife always tells me not to tell as many stories, but my wife's not here. So like, get ready.
Right.
Just talked like half the concert, but none of us were upset because that guy's got like countless tunes, in the. And I think like I guess it was a fun fact about this. I could be wrong. My memory could fail me here, but I think he said that he was playing with somebody, another like really great trumpet player. It may have been Clifford Brown, but maybe not. Where he was playing, and then they went over to a coffee shop to like down the road right before the gig. And the trumpet player was like, yeah, man, like go and just like write a tune real quick. And then he comes back and in like 15 minutes and wrote Whisper Not, which is just like,
Yeah.
it's like infuriating too, because it's just like, man, like a treasured standard that just like he just like cranked it out, like didn't even have a piano, was just sitting in a coffee shop and like wrote out the melody and the changes.
Well, some tunes just happen like that, you know. Yeah, it's amazing, and yeah, I think it speaks to just how much was going on in his mind that he was able to put it all down that quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of my favorite songwriters and composers have at least like one or two songs that were written that way. And yeah,
man, crazy stuff. Well, back to your thing, Watch the Moon. Man, I'm curious because there were two like little motifs that whenever I was listening to it, and I listened to it over and over and over again, to the point where Lydia just like went in her room and shut the door, and I was like, it's a pop. She was like, yeah, but I've heard it 4 times already, and it's 5.5 minutes.
Right.
But there were two things that it probably was not intentional at all, but it almost felt like there was like a Lord of the Rings like little motif that was quoted. It's like,
it's funny, man.
You know, like that thing.
It's funny because another friend of mine mentioned that to me the other day. I've never seen Lord of the Rings. I've never really heard the music from Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
There's a couple. There's one on the upcoming album, Redacted. There's a very intentional quote on one of the songs that was intentionally pulled from another place, and I think when everyone hears it on the album, it'll be very obvious. But this one, was just something that worked in the 2 bars that I was trying to use to connect the pre-chorus to the chorus of the tune, and it just sounded kind of. I was like, this sounds kind of majestic in a weird way. I mean, it doesn't transform the tune necessarily, and I thought something was up because when my friend Chris, or his stage name Clunis, when he came over to record over the song, he heard that section of it and he said it's got kind of a John Williams movie score vibe to it. Yeah. It's kind of weird, and I thought probably, but I didn't. Yeah, I had no idea that it was actually like quoting something else, and that's happened a couple times in my time just as a composer, and that's going to happen. Music is a very old thing, and I know in literature they say there's only really 10 original stories, and every other story is just building outward from them. And I don't know why we can't call music the same thing or refer to it the same way. But anyway.
I agree, man.
Yeah, I stole it. Is that what you want me to say?
This is now a gotcha podcast, by the way. And we're just going to steal that where I'm like, there's like a Lord of the Rings thing, and there's going to be a hard edit to, I stole it. And then the podcast.
Yeah.
Man,
awesome.
There actually was a situation that I didn't tell anybody, and I was hoping people wouldn't like notice. Now I'm building it up to be a whole nother thing. It's not a big thing. Back on the second record that I put out, which was called From Dusk Till Dawn back in 2017, there's an original tune on there that I wrote called By Candlelight, and I guess I should say me and David Mescati co-wrote it, but there is like a motif, and at the end of the lick, it's like ba 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 boop ba ba boop wea, and everybody was like, yeah, you just have been going to McDonald's too much, because that's the McDonald's thing. And I remember being in the studio and Matt Maldonado like recognizing it and then going like, how long was that like little bit? And they were like, it's like 1.5, 2 seconds or something like that. He's like, as long as you're beneath the 3-second rule, the copyright police aren't going to come and get you. And I was like, great. I didn't plan it that way, but perfect. Now I'm not liable to be sued by the strongest fast food chain in the world. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'm. Yeah, I don't think they want to waste their time on that many battles anyway. But
Sure. Well, and don't ask me how I know this, but whenever you go into certain McDonald's, into their like inside to like go and order, and you don't go through the drive-through, they're playing classical music. They're playing like Bach and Beethoven, and it was like, I guess I get what you're going for. You're trying to go for this like opposites attract type thing with like really refined music with like not really refined food, but I don't know, whatever works, man. I guess, you know, at that point, any marketing idea is on the table. Just like try it out.
Right.
Snack wraps, let's do it. Nope, didn't work. Throw it out. McRib, bring it back every like 12 months. Let's do it, baby. You know?
Yeah, I you know, when I'm eating my filet o fish at 3 a.m. after the 5-hour wedding gig that it didn't feed us and paid us, you know, $20 an hour. Definitely, it's not a complete experience unless Bartok's Second Dance Suite is playing, you know, on the PA. So, yeah.
I'm more upset that in Texas you're not saying that you're going to a Whataburger afterwards. You're going to a McDonald's. McDonald's is the pre-gig hang, and Whataburger is the post-gig hang. Come on, Don.
Yeah.
We all know it.
Right.
Well, man, so you got a redacted new album coming out that I think you were telling me that allegedly that you've been kind of like working on like a lot of those tunes, or at least whether it's like writing those tunes in their entirety or just like finishing up some ideas over the course of the quarantine. So like, tell me about that, man, because you've got albums out before, and then you've had like some other like EPs and then plenty of singles in the past couple of years. But is this going to be like another full-length feature album? And just like tell me about that process and that writing process of what the inspiration was.
Yeah, well, full-length albums that I've done in the past, like you mentioned, they never really came about by me sitting down and thinking like, all right, it's going to be a 10-track project and I'm going to start it out like this and then going in and writing songs from there. It's always been pretty much me just because I'm always tinkering with different ideas, and, you know, Logic is, as a recording software, is a great way to just flesh out ideas and hear them played back to you after you record them. So it usually is, the albums come about just by way of me doing enough of those at once and then counting everything up and being like, oh my God, I have enough for an album, you know? And I, you know, even when I did that album that I did with my friend Joel White, which you may have heard a few years ago.
Brother, right?
Brother, yes. That was still pretty much just, we recorded one song together because I'd been meaning to do some recording with him anyway, and we loved the process and the result of it so much that we just started doing a couple more songs. And, you know, about 3 songs in, we're like, this could just be an album. And so at that point, you know, you just got to move full steam ahead to get the whole thing fleshed out. It was the same thing here, really. Most of these songs are things that I started working on within the last year or so, I would say. I included a couple older tracks. The oldest one goes all the way back to when I lived on campus at UT 3 years ago. But for the most part, yeah, it's all stuff that I've written roughly in the last year or so, and I've been working on recording. And yeah, I just had all these songs that I had recorded about like 30 to 40% of, and we're just sitting there, and quarantine broke out and I didn't have my senior recital anymore. And it's like, it was just a very obvious place to put all this musical energy that I was trying to harness and create something with around that time. And so suddenly I had 4 songs finished for this album, you know, and then it was 6, and it's like, why can't we make it to 10? Why not to, I think now it's at 13, will be the actual track listing on the album. And of course, along the way, a couple of those songs I actually wrote along, like, since quarantine broke out, right? Because, you know, the compositional process is a constant thing,
Yeah.
fortunately and unfortunately. Um, and uh, and I just was trying to, you know, get a couple of those tracks that I had thought of in the midst of all this out with the rest.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Man, I'm curious because is Watch the Moon going to be on that album? Is that included?
Yeah, all the last 3 singles that I've put out in the last year and a half or so, Ballon Rouge, Don't Mind, and now Watch the Moon will be on the album.
Okay, very cool. So a real quick jump back to Watch the Moon. Was there a certain, because I talked about that Lord of the Rings thing, and you said that was unintentional, but was there a certain, dare I say it, Intervisions type influence on the bridge of Watch the Moon?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, that was a much more, like, obviously I don't write anything thinking like, today I'm going to write, you know, like, I'm going to write another, I know you're talking about, like, Living for the City. Yeah. But I mean, it's the same, if you can hear the vocals in the background, it's the same kind of sound, but it's like with the Lord of the Rings thing, it was something I kind of just realized after the fact. And I, you know, if it's a similar sound, great. You know, I hope, if anything, I hope that it makes someone, like, who hasn't heard me ever just think to themselves, like, where did he get that sound from? And then they, like, look at my Spotify bio and they're like, oh, he's influenced a lot by Stevie Wonder. And then suddenly they're listening to Stevie Wonder, and you know, that's a win for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was just I really wanted to make a big, beautiful bridge for that song. And you know, personally, I feel the proudest about that specific part of the song of any of it.
And honestly, that was where I, like, found the most, like, because if something's super killing, I'll find myself, like, laugh out loud or, like, audibly make it like, whoa. And that was where it happened. I mean, the whole time I was just, like, chuckling. I was like, man, this is really, really great. But then whenever that happened, I was like, oh man. And then I kept singing to myself. I was like, oh, what's it like? And then I couldn't figure out where it was from. And I was like, which Stevie record is that from? And then I, like, traced it back to Living for the City. But no, I think that's the best way of making something, and the best way of having somebody realize, like, who you're influenced by, because it's not like a direct rip, and it's not even that you were focusing on it in the first place. It's just that you're so influenced by that specific person that certain elements of their music are going to come out in
naturally. Yeah.
But the thing that I love so much about your music is it doesn't sound like you at all are trying to be anybody. It sounds very much like, in all of your music, that you are making something that you think, regardless of what anybody else thinks, which, not to say that anybody's thinking badly about anything, but like you make a lot of really bold choices, not only in, like, your music that is a little bit more with, like, the flair for the contemporary and more group-based stuff, and it's very evident that you have, like, that jazz idiom and, like, jazz and bebop background, but you also are listening to a lot of stuff like Stevie Wonder and Stylistics and stuff like that. And then there's this perfect marriage of it. But even in your stuff that is more strictly jazz, or things like the big band charts you've been doing, which people can find on YouTube for UT Jazz Orchestra, like Not a Nightmare and Full of October, and just, like, all of those kind of compositions. There was one that I texted you about the other day. Forgive me for forgetting the title. What was that one that I was like?
Oh, so was it Something in the Air?
Yes. Like, so good. And obviously it's a very different animal than things like Don't Mind and Watch the Moon and Ballon Rouge and everything. But you can hear that in your I don't know if I should say, like, tenacity, but in your, like, just full steam ahead doing what you want to do, you can also understand why it's like, oh, he's making these choices because this is probably somebody who he's listened to. And like you said, people can go then and look at who you like self-proclaim being like, yeah, I listen to these guys a lot. But it doesn't at all feel like it's a rip. It feels like it's like just deeply embedded in the things that you really, really enjoyed. And then it just comes out naturally, which is really, really great. So good.
Thank you.
Of course.
Glad you like it.
Man, I wrote down a few things here, so I want to make sure to get to several of them. So for a little bit of background to listeners, how me and Thomas came to know each other. And I always tell like these stories to people, and I hope it's not like embarrassing or anything, that it just like feels like it always starts with your dad. But so like we came up in the same like area-ish, you know, like the greater Houston area, I guess we could say, even though I'm maybe a little bit outside of that. I grew up in a town called Lake Jackson, which is 60 miles south. And then you were up in Klein, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, I was starting to gig a little bit, just like here and there as like 17, 18-year-old in Lake Jackson, the surrounding areas. And through a very early and consistent mentor throughout my life, Brian Casey, he was like, yeah, you should have this guy named Ted Wenglinski come on the Bandstand. And I remember having such trouble accurately pronouncing Wenglinski at the time. I was like, Wenglinski. And I made sure before I called him, I like practiced it on the, like to myself, like in front of the mirror. And then I was like, hi, Mr. Wenglinski. And he was like, yeah, this is Ted. Who's this? I was like, this is Christian WIGGS. Like, you don't know me, but like somebody told me to give you a call. And then like me and Ted started playing. And then over the years, like Ted would come to the gigs, and he, man, your dad has a lot of things that we could brag about him on, but the one thing that I always stood out was he was there at the gig before I was, and I would show up to the gig an hour before downbeat. He was always there like 90 minutes to like 2 hours before. He's like, yeah, I just want to be there with plenty of time. He is the consummate professional gigging musician. Like,
Yeah, that was definitely, whenever I would go to gigs with him as a kid, that was the thing that I always observed. And, you know, he'd just be like, we could just hang out, you know, for a bit, like after we had put everything down. And so it's, you know, I definitely feel like I'd like to think I inherited a bit of that from him. You know, I obviously slack off every once in a while. Everyone does. But, you know, I don't think I've ever heard of him, certainly never admitting to it, but just in any case of him being, you know, less than an hour, getting to the venue less than an hour ahead of downbeat.
Yeah. And you inherited that too, to like a really great degree, because you would call me every gig and you'd be like, hey, I'm leaving my house now. It's approximately this amount of time for me to get to the gig. And then any time that you were going to be even just like a few minutes past, because like Congress was totally backed up and we were playing on 6th and Congress at a steakhouse downtown in Austin, you'd be like, hey man, I'm so sorry. I'm 2 blocks away. We're in standstill traffic. I promise I'll run in. And I was like, dude, it's totally fine. But you definitely inherited by association of being there from your dad. But the thing that Ted would always say was like, we'd get to the gig early and then we'd sit down and we'd like have a conversation, and he'd just shake his head as we're doing like sound check. He'd be like, man, I was like, what? And he's like, man, I was leaving and my son Thomas was shedding at the house, and he's like, I'm just getting scared, man. He's gonna pass me like super soon. And I remember being like, oh, that's crazy. And he was like, yeah, you should like have him on a gig sometime if I can't. And then it wasn't until like the next year I went to San Marcos, I went to Texas State. And then the year after that, you came to Austin. And then we, if I recall correctly, had this back and forth of just like, we were in the same room several times. Feet of each other. And we didn't even know. And then like, we only knew each other on social media, and I'd be like, whoa, you were at Valentino's, or you were at this concert? I was at this concert. I was like right there. And then I can't remember when was the first time that we actually legitimately met. Was it on a gig?
Yeah, it was on the steakhouse gig. The first time I subbed in on the steakhouse gig for David, that was the first time.
Yeah, man. And that was so great too, because, you know, working with David for so long, we had really, you know, especially doing like duo gigs and things like that and trio gigs where it really is about like everybody being dialed in and everything. It can be sometimes a gamble when you have like new people on, because if there's not like a timekeeper there, right? Like other than the bass player, you know, like a drummer or something, but obviously it's not like super kosher for steakhouse gigs. It's always kind of, you know, a toss up whether or not like the vibe's going to go well. But I remember that first gig being like, man, Thomas sounds really, really great. So anytime David isn't here, then I got to have you on. And then as David started to leave and like went to Colorado, I mean, it just like, I remember you kind of throwing your name and your hat in the ring, and you were like, you know, please keep me in consideration. And there were a couple of considerations going on, but I think the thing that struck me the most was not only like your professionalism and not only how you would play on the bandstand, but like your compositional styles, and the fact that the thing that I wanted to do was have a much more like contemporary flair for things and try to go a more original approach that is evident in my influence, a man who shall not be named because he is always named in probably every episode of the podcast, Kurt Owen. But well, who said that redacted, right? That's the unofficial name of this podcast, right?
Yeah.
But like you had like all of those things that I wanted to do, and then we would even be like playing stuff, and you would very respectfully, but like you wouldn't even really ask. You'd just start like imposing reharmonizations on tunes, and you'd be like, can I do like intros for stuff? And that was where I really like started to be like, yeah, this is why Thomas is the dude, because he could just like start playing amazing intros to the point where me and the bass player, like our trio, James Suter, for people who know him or don't know him, we would just kind of
Melody. Mr. Melody, as he goes.
Yeah. Mr. Melody, we would just, he would do the glasses thing where he's like, oh, and like from the back.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I have a video of that from a gig we did in November. I'll edit this in.
Send it to me. Send it to me. I need that. That.
I'll edit it into this right now over me talking, where he's doing.
Okay.
And I made it into a GIF too, so that way we can cherish it forever.
Perfect.
But yeah, and we would just look at each other and we'd be like, man, do you want to like go get a beer from the bar? Because like Thomas could do this for hours. Like he could just play the rest of the gig and we could just get out of here. But it was like because of all of those things that I was like, man, like Thomas is just like the obvious choice. And I'm sad that our record is kind of on hold until we can like safely gather a big band into a small, confined room. But,
right.
We still got that going, working on that. But so anyways, all of that huge tangent to come back to, we kind of grew up in the same area. We were doing very similar things. But I am curious because, we had the Clarion. I don't know. Have you ever been down to the Clarion over in?
Yeah, I actually, you mentioned Brian Casey. I've played there once. It was with the Brazosport Symphony, which Brian now conducts, about a year and a half ago. And it was Jeff, and it was only because my dad couldn't do it. But Jeff Kashawa from the Rippingtons was the guest artist, and it was a tremendous experience for sure.
Yeah, I remember you doing that, and then like coming back and playing Steakhouse like the next Friday, and you were like, "Yeah, man, that was like one of the best, most favorite performances of all time." But so what was I talking about with the Clarion? Anyways, my influences came from whenever I was like 11, I saw Take Six come through town, and it almost like pains me to say that like I saw Take Six whenever I was 11, because there was so much that I didn't understand, but at the same time it was so compelling, the same way that Stevie Wonder is compelling, that just like you don't understand it, but you're just like, what the hell is that? Yeah. And then the very next year, a group, whenever I was like 12, came to town that was called the New York Voices, which is like comparable, for those listening, comparable to like Manhattan Transfer, things like that. It's like a quartet SATB thing. And they were doing like a bunch of like Coltrane stuff and, Fred Coots tunes and actually on the record that I first was introduced to them by that they were promoting on their tour was one of my favorite ballads that I ended up recording, which is also the title of the album Behind Your Head that I spy on your wall, which is In the Wee Small Hours.
This album?
Yeah. By your favorite and mine, for example.
Yeah.
We won't go down that rabbit hole. Not yet.
Yeah, that could be that discussion could be a bonus episode for sure.
Episode 3.5. We'll do it. It's just a screaming match. That's all it is. Like the audio is super distorted. Yeah, but anyways, so I'm curious. Whenever like you were coming up, obviously you had your dad who was like this high in demand gigging musician. But tell me about what immediately got you into jazz, and then by extension, then all of this stuff with Stevie and Stylistics, and if there were any like very influential performances that you saw that affected that as well.
Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, growing up, yeah, my dad, he started off as a classical pianist. So he and I kind of had opposite approaches in that way. He didn't come to jazz really as a, with any aspirations to play it, let's say, until really in college, which for him was the late 70s. And of course, so basically the music of his that I grew up listening to was a lot of the music that was prominent in jazz from around that time, like the Keith Jarrett European Quartet with Jan Garbarek, Weather Report, the album Heavy Weather, probably the album I heard most as a kid, in all honesty. The early Pat Metheny group stuff. And for him, Super Trios by McCoy Tyner. If you ever have him on the podcast, I'm sure he'll say this as well. But he always talks about how Super Trios was the album that made him a jazz pianist. And so, yeah, growing up, just even as a toddler in Sugarland, and hearing, before I moved up to Klein, and hearing those influences musically. Like all those groups and those albums are things that are cool on their own. It's a bonus when your parents love it and listen to it all the time. Yeah. As I grew up, and of course the stuff, by the way, that my mom was listening to at around the same time when she was growing up was like all the new wave stuff. Like she was the only kid at her rural high school who was listening to Michael Jackson, which meant that she was hearing all the Quincy Jones arrangements and, like all the great production on that stuff and all the new wave pop rock from that era, like the Police, Talking Heads, all that stuff. So all that stuff was what I heard as a toddler. And growing up and finally getting an independent sense of musical taste, I didn't really rebel from it because I already thought it was so cool, like just on its own. It just made sense to me. All this very rich, organic music with all these moving parts and these lush textures of sound. I just wanted, if anything, to find music like it that was coming out today. And of course, when you're looking for music like that today that has a very prominent jazz influence that is electric in many ways, but still has plenty of percussion and soul influences and just a very worldly sound. What's the first couple of names that we always think of? People like Snarky Puppy. You might think Jacob Collier, Roy Hargrove and the RH Factor. And you branch out from there. You start listening to like D'Angelo, Charlie Hunter, Jacob Mann, Knower, Moonchild, all these different groups that are out today are if not for quarantine, would be touring right now. Yeah.
Jacob Collins was to be here 2 months ago.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to go to that. Yeah, and Michael Mayo, one of my favorite singers today, was going to open for him, that really bummed me out, man, because I was just looking forward. Yeah, yeah, that was why I was going to go, honestly. Yeah, but
I'm so upset now.
So, but in any case, you know, listening, like finding all these people, however you come to it, is just such a formative experience. And you know, I'm very thankful to both my parents that I grew up listening to all of this beautiful, rich music from that time. But it's also fascinating now to be able to connect it with stuff that's coming out today and have that historical context just sort of ingrained, like in my blood, really.
Yeah.
And it you know, and so I have all of that, and you know, like all of the older jazz in general, you know, like all the Miles Quintet stuff, all, you know, even the like the actual bebop era stuff with Bud Powell and Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker to look back to as a frame of reference. But there's a very clear snapshot of how that is reflected today in music overall.
Yeah, man. And like, I think that anyone who listens to your stuff, especially your like reimaginings and like big band tunes and things of standards, definitely hears that that's what you're trying to do. I mean, like by one, you know, standard or by one accord, you were looking for like, how is all of this stuff manifesting today? But then not only that, you were like, well, I want to know how all this stuff is manifesting today, but I also want to know how I can take what's happening today and manifest it, like, or superimpose
Draw
it
from what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why, spoiler alert, redacted, you go to my head. I'm so excited to hear what you're doing with that big band.
Yeah.
Quick plug for that, I guess. You know, Stephen Force is a really great trumpet player who also comes from Lake Jackson. There's something, you know, people always say there's something in the water down in Lake Jackson, as like a joke. I don't know. I haven't had the tap water in a long time, so maybe if I go back, then we'll see. But people say there's something in the water down there, but really, to properly pay tribute, it's just the educators down there. I mean, like we were talking about Brian Casey and Richard Burke and Martin Montoya and Jim Cook, and all of the people are really fantastic. But another person who is really great from there, Stephen Force, has been doing this quarantine big band album where we're all recording things remotely, trying to make the most of it. And you and I are both on that. And Thomas is going to have a couple of his compositions, one original, one cover on there, which we're really excited about, which is what I was referencing with You Go to My Head. So send me some sneak peeks of that, man. I'm super excited.
Will do.
Yeah. But yeah, so were there any people that you went and saw, or like any life-changing kind of influential concerts that you saw of just like big names, or not even big names, just like what hit you?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I think thinking back to like middle school and high school, I mean, I grew up listening to Earth, Wind and Fire too, just because my parents were big fans of them. But I got to see them in the 8th grade with my mom and my one of my dearest friends, Claire, who also went to UT with me and who also just graduated. But yeah, and it was, you know, the thing about Earth, Wind and Fire is they're obviously a collective of musicians. You know, like there's all the sections possible in an orchestra are represented on the album. But the one element that's always missing typically when you see them in concert is the strings. Well, when you see them with the Houston Symphony, you hear all the string parts from the album. So that was phenomenal, to say the least. And I think it gave me a just, if I'm thinking about what it did for me as an up and coming musician at the time, I think it gave me an appreciation for the totality of arrangements that you hear on albums like that. You begin to realize that, you know, if there's not strings in the regular live setup for Earth, Wind and Fire, they have to accommodate that somehow. And there really is nothing quite like hearing the actual string parts played by a full string section, you know, with an orchestra. And yeah, I mean, they played all the tunes at that concert that I would hope for them to play. And it's funny because they went off stage without playing In the Stone. And I was like, Mom, they didn't play In the Stone, because that's like one of my favorite, that's the opener to one of my favorite albums of all time. And of course, then they come on for the encore and and I just lost my mind at that point. But that was one that was very influential. I think another one was in high school. My dad and I, we go up to the Northeast very frequently because my grandparents on his side live in Southern Maryland, and we like to go to DC a lot. But we went to Blues Alley up there, which is one of the main jazz venues in Washington, DC, second only to the Kennedy Center. But the group that we saw was Roberta Gambarini, vocalist you may know of. Yeah. And the backing band was Cyrus Chestnut on piano, who to that point I had never heard about. Amin Salim on bass, from Roy Hargrove's band, and Jimmy Cobb, rest in peace, the late great Jimmy Cobb, which was insane, just someone. Yeah, and my dad and I, we got there, in the spirit, like we've talked about, of my dad getting to gigs. We got there probably, 2 or 3 days before the gig started, but, like an hour or so. Sure. But, and we were able to get a table like right next to his ride cymbal, and we were sitting away. So the whole way through the set, we were sitting like 5 feet away from the last living band member on Kind of Blue. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, after he got up, we very briefly got to say hello to him, and he was, I have to say, seemed like a very genuine, nice guy. We were just two guys off the street who came in and listened to some music, and he he gave us the time of day and was just willing to talk for a few minutes, and that was just huge for me. And Cyrus Chestnut, of course, incidentally, when I came to UT 2 years later, he was the guest artist at the jazz festival with the jazz orchestra. I wasn't in the band yet at that point, but nonetheless, just getting to see him again after all of that was incredible. And he has such a strong gospel influence in his playing, but at the same time, just this very Oscar Peterson influenced bebop approach that's just beautiful to hear in person. Yeah. And of course, Roberta Gambarini was a great vocalist to hear. Yeah.
Man, speaking of influences, I mean, we've kind of talked about, obviously Stevie being, I hope it's not inappropriate for me to say, probably the most paramount person who you, or maybe not influenced by, but who at least you talk to me a lot about.
I would say he's in the top 3. Let's put it that way. He's in the top 3.
Okay. Good to know. But then I guess more on the side of, I guess if we want to talk more strictly jazz, and we don't have to talk strictly jazz, but of those players when you were coming up, and maybe this was also influenced. I mean, I remember a drive back to Austin from Lockhart, from a gig where you were telling me kind of about what the early influences were, and then who you came to think, this is the guy. So tell me about the progression of who your main influence was that you were grasping onto at first, and how that has evolved, if it has at all, or if that person still holds, the champion belt.
Well, yeah. So I always like to think of it, everyone has one person that made them want to do what they do in jazz. For my dad, like I say, it was McCoy Tyner. For Jeff Helmer, my piano professor for these last 4 years at UT, he would tell you it was Wynton Kelly for him. For me, more than anybody else, when I started to really get into the classics of jazz, and the first album that I really analytically listened to and just fell in love with was, I would say, Relaxing with the Miles Davis Quintet. And listening to Red Garland's piano playing on that album is great if you're an upcoming pianist or just a jazz improviser in general, because he was incredibly adventurous and he one of the hardest grooving pianists to ever live, easily. But at the same time, in this very old-fashioned bebop era sense, he had some very distinct melodic ideas that he would call back to a lot, a couple like signature licks. And so when you listen analytically to an album like that, you can hear, when a certain chord progression comes up, then you hear him throw out this lick, and he throws it out like 2 or 3 times over the course of the album. And it's like, oh, you start to get an idea of how his mind works, basically. And so I just fell in love with that. And I listened to as much of recordings with him as I possibly could around that time. And I transcribed a couple of his solos. And that was the moment that I actually started, I would say, becoming a jazz improviser, was hearing that and hearing in a very digestible way how that mind works. And that sort of enabled me to start listening past just the very bebop roots of the music to more modern players like like Herbie Hancock or Chick Corea, or who I probably told you about on this drive from Lockhart, but Keith Jarrett, someone today who has the spirit and the sound of all of that foundational material. But if you transcribe a solo of his, he doesn't, it's very hard to find any examples of him playing the same phrase twice, in different isolated incidents across records, or even just different tunes on the same record. He has a complete melodic freedom about his playing, which has always been very inspiring to me. And so since I finally was able to look past the obvious barriers that tend to make it difficult for jazz fans and musicians alike to listen to him analytically, once I was able to get past that, which is a hump. I don't mean to to minimize that. But once I was able to start listening analytically, it's a complete new level of work in jazz, and he's not the only person that does it. Obviously, he there's an entire generation, an entire couple generations now after him that are equally as explorative across all the different instruments, and both of the other members of his trio that he's most known for, Jack DeJohnette and Gary Peacock, you could say the exact same thing about either of them. Charles Lloyd, the saxophonist that arguably gave him a career, who has gone on and continued recording all throughout the many decades since the 60s, was probably the guy that gave him that kind of inspiration, if you would ask him. So it enables you to listen to more modern stuff like that, basically. Once you have that foundational, like Red Garland or Wynton Kelly or whoever else, it is for any one person. Once you have their voice in your head and you can see their mental process.
Yeah. I think it's like really important too, to be able to, kind of how we were talking at the very beginning of this, being able to hear your influences through your playing that weren't overt, but they were just like hints at stuff. I think that's also like really important to hear in other people, because you may not understand like what they're doing or why they're doing it. You think it's just entirely original until you start to like backtrack and see who they were listening to and see how it's been a snowball effect. And I think there sometimes can be this this necessary pressure, but sometimes it becomes to like a very extreme extent where people they think they have to be entirely original. But I think what people need to, or not people, but younger jazz musicians like me and you that we're starting to hopefully like get a grasp on, that we're trying to heed the advice of people who are older than us and more experienced, is that you can have originality, but through evolution of listening to so many things rather than just like a concentrated, one or two or three people listening to so many things. And they don't even have to be all your instrument, but just figuring out how to make that into a snowball effect that then furthers on the craft. Because this whole thing, I mean, to think that any one generation of jazz, or really music in general, but specifically we're talking about jazz, to think that any one iteration or decade of it is an isolated incident is just ignorance, right? Because everything has been pushed forward as time has gone on.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And then to your point about the getting over the necessary hump, right, of Keith Jarrett, for anybody who doesn't get that, just go watch any Keith Jarrett video, anyone at all, any record, and you'll hear it, sometimes more than others. But I think that that's also kind of a cool testament of self-expression as well, because when you think about it, we're not like robots on a stage putting out this music that's like super calculated, right? It all comes from a place of passion and inspiration, and vocalists, and even just outside of music, we as musicians or just as people have to express ourselves in a way that's just like, oh man, or like, yes, like just with all of our different emotions. And so when you're emoting through music, it's almost a no-brainer that people who are playing a non-vocal instrument or playing an instrument that doesn't require like your mouth for like a mouthpiece, like a trumpet or like a horn player, things like that. If you're playing a rhythm section instrument, then it stands to reason that there's going to be some sort of like vocal element. And the most killing people, you can hear that exactly what they're playing, they're singing as well, which is a testament to how incredibly well-versed they are in what they're doing, that they already have it up here. And then not only do they have it up here, but they're able to express it then note for note, pitch by pitch on the keyboard, and then also being able to, so I guess that's just like a small little tangent of being like, appreciate Keith Jarrett because he's doing the most, and he's like,
right.
Don't view it as a distraction. View it as like a fullness, a full commitment, because you can't listen to that guy. Not only he's playing, but his vocalizations as well. You can't listen to that guy and think, oh, he's thinking about what he's going to have for dinner after the performance. I mean, it's so evident that like his entire world is the music. Instead of seeing things, it's just a world that's created by an auditory, listening experience.
Yeah, we all do it too. I mean, I either through faces or through sounds. Much to my girlfriend's dislike, I tend to do it through faces.
Makes taking taking good candid pictures a little harder.
Right, exactly. No kidding. Some musicians manage to channel it somehow. I mean, Kurt Rosenwinkel, if I'm not mistaken, the great guitar player Kurt Rosenwinkel, who I highly would recommend everyone check out if they haven't. I believe he mics himself, even though he doesn't intend to sing. And then it's just mixed into his guitar mix, and you don't even really notice it very much on an album. If anything, you just notice a slight like ambiguity in the timbre of his guitar, but that's him singing, and it's a fascinating sound for sure.
Yeah. Man, we touched real I kind of briefly, and we did talk about it, to a good amount, but I also want to put a little bit more of like from an origins type thing, your writing process and your reharmonization process and arranging process, because you do this for like a wide variety of different size groups, right? Like you write for big band, you write for like small horn ensemble, you write for just, trio and quartet stuff, and you write for solo piano, and then just do stuff on Logic. So what's that process like for you from start to finish, no matter how long? And then also when you are doing reharmonizations, how does that manifest, and what is your guiding principle for each tune, and what vocabulary you're going to use in the realm of chord changes? Like, how does that inform how you write, and why do you do it that way?
Well, I think in terms of the writing process, you know, when it's just original music, and we talked about this again earlier with the theme, but I feel like that's if you want to think of that as sort of an example, again, it's just about, in that instance, it was just a melodic shape that sort of had been sitting in my head for some time. And if you're a jazz improviser of any kind, that's going to happen. You know, it just becomes this compulsive thing that's just in your head all the time.
Yeah.
And it's a curse, and we love and we hate it. But it's all about harnessing that. If you're starting with a melody, it's all about harnessing that, figuring out how to strategically repeat the melodic figure, but at the same time begin to vary it. And then how, once you have that idea fully fleshed out, how to answer it with some contrasting material. You know, maybe it goes to a different key center. Maybe it, you know, maybe it just goes to the dominant, basically, and just sits around there for a bit, or you know, or maybe you just have an incredibly short tune. You know, like Peace by Horace Silver is only 10 bars long. There's no bridge, so it's just all about making sure that your ideas are fully saturated before you abandon them. And trusting the idea that's already in your head as a composer, and not trying to mask it too much, you know, not trying to abuse it. If it's a genuine, pure idea that's informed just by like music that you play all the time, then it should feel natural already. And you can obviously, there are plenty of ways to refine it, but I feel that whittling it down too much can kind of have the result of chasing the idea away. So I try not to do that terribly much. And there are moments that if you're trying to like pick out everything and just work it down to a pattern, there are moments in my music and in every composer's music that wouldn't make sense. But it just sounds right when you actually hear it. There's even a Stevie tune that I think of like that. Send One Your Love, that I wish I had these hooked up right now. I have 3 keyboards around me. I wish I could play one of them to demonstrate. But the A section, I mean, if you're a jazz musician, and
are they hooked up?
No, they're not. I would need to. I'm sorry, I didn't. I should have prepared.
No.
But in any case, the A section, it sounds like if you're a jazz musician, you're just trying to write out a quick chord sheet. It's easy to hear these 4 bars as just the bass doing a chromatic descent, and it's just like an even pattern across 4 bars. But it really isn't. You know. And it actually, the second bar, it would be, but the second bar goes a tritone away to this diminished chord that has the same sound. It has the sound of an inversion, like of the other chord that your brain wants to think it is, but it's not the same chord. And I'm thinking, you know, when I realized that, I was like, oh my God, I've been appropriating. Or not appropriate. I've been just glazing over this very crucial part of the music this whole time, and it just sounded okay the other way, but it sounds right now. But like, why did he do that? And all I can assume is it sounded right when he composed it. So that's a guiding principle. And in terms of reharmonization, I think. You know, like, I think there was a very popular culture in the last 10 years of reharmonization, you know, with, I guess, Dirty Loops was a very radical expression of that trend. But also, you know, just a lot of musicians on online and who, you know, who just share music online. We're trying all these different methods of reharmonization, and I enjoyed it for a long time. But what I started to notice was that there wasn't terribly much consistency to the reharmonizations, and so and consistency and like just keeping things in kind of an idiomatic framework is very important when reharmonizing, to me anyway. And like you don't want to make anything that just like sounds comical and only happens once and doesn't come back, unless it's for a truly dramatic effect. If you do it if you do it too many times in a row, then it almost starts to sound like parody, and I don't think it builds anything. So, like if I'm reharmonizing a pop tune, rather than just taking a bunch of moments and just trying to take it through all 12 keys over the course of this one tune, I would much rather just like, okay, it's like I did that chart for Human Nature for Vintage 15 back in the spring. It's like, okay, this tune is built on like 4 5 4 5 4, like just for so long, and it's a beautiful tune. I don't mean to knock it, it's one of my favorites, but but so why not just pick another progression, maybe another progression that's very idiomatic to R&B and soul music, or just popular music in general, and just sort of see how that melody works over it, and maybe you throw in some surprising moments along the way, but nothing that pulls away too dramatically from that, just so you can rebuild the tune in this new image that's more personalized to you. And that's what I always try to go for the most part.
When you I was so glad that you brought up that Human Nature chart, which Redacted will be on the next album that me and Thomas do together, hopefully recording in the next 6-12 months, something like that. As soon as the virus is under control, we're hitting the studio, we're going to lay some stuff down. But I was so glad you brought that up, because I think that you are a great check for me, where I always want, like, I'm just like, hit me with those like flat 6, flat 7 chords, or like hit me with like flat major 3, just like whatever is going on, because I just want like the spiciest thing all the time, because it makes me feel so good. And like, to use an analogy that my brother actually used many years ago, but I think is very applicable to he actually used it in reference to Dirty Loops, which is funny that you brought that up. So it's kind of all gonna work out. Like Dirty Loops, he's like, it's cool, but it's like taking like a nice like cupcake, like a nice like small cupcake, and then Dirty Loops is like, oh, you like icing? And it's like, yeah, I like some cream cheese icing. It's like, well, here's like a dump truck of cream cheese icing, boom, and just like spreading it on top, and it's giving you so much of what you want. It's like having your favorite meal every night of the week for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. By 4 days, 3 days, maybe even the second day, you're not going to want that anymore. It's going to lose its flavor. So when you and I were going over early drafts of Human Nature, and I was kind of saying like, oh no, like I want the, I was like, I want that really full. You were like, no, I'll give it to you, but you need to wait, because and at first we're going to do it to where it's this like not, and people will understand once they hear the track, however long in the future. But it just like, and then how you did like small, just tiny variations, where when we get to like the third verse, right? On Electricizer Everywhere, and on the word where, you had this like really amazing, just like it kind of like turns on its head for a minute, and you're like, whoa, like to like make you shift your stature or your demeanor or whatever, and then you went right back to the same kind of like consistent motif that you had, but you were just using backgrounds to vary it a little bit, but you were keeping that consistent type thing. And it wasn't like we were jumping around to all these different spaces. And I think that's something just very much to your credit that younger musicians, and I say that as like us being the same age, like we don't always have that kind of discipline. We're just like, oh, like we're introduced to a whole new world of sounds. We want this all the time. And then like the older musicians say, no, like this needs everything in moderation, right? Because if you do too much of it, it's going to lose its flair. And I think that's one of the things that makes you so great and what will make you like prolific is that you have that restraint to you, that it's like, no, you're going to appreciate it more in the long run if we're going to withhold a few things. So, yeah, man.
It's linearity. I don't know if linearity is a word, but the concept of being linear is a very important part of music for sure. And just, you know, the whole thing is a very big experience. And, you want to make sure that you want every moment to be perfectly, like complete as its own isolated moment in the music, but you also want, you want it to add up to something, right? So yeah, it's you don't want to give everyone everything all in one moment. Yeah, you want to pace it out for sure.
Absolutely, man. We definitely have to do this again at some point because I think there's just such a wealth of information that you have and wisdom that you have on compositional stuff. And I'd love to talk more soon about the big band writing that you've been doing. We do have like a few like speed round kind of questions that I like to ask, just like to tie things up. The first episode we did with Dufour is 2 hours long. And I love it. I love it so much. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I'm going to try to keep, I kept yesterday's episode that we did with Paul Deemer. We hit the 90-minute mark. And then I'm trying to like keep them to like a 90-minute. I feel like it's a good amount of time because we don't want to like cut it short for the sake of being like, and that's all the time that we have. Because anyone who knows anything about the current state of things right now knows that we have all the time in the world.
We have plenty of time,
But you can only keep people's attention.
Speak for yourself, man. I gotta be. I got a gig downtown at 6. I actually have all my gear in the car right now.
Do you really?
I'm gonna take it. No, I don't.
I was like, what?
No, I don't have a gig. I was just. No.
Yeah. Man.
No, man.
The steakhouse thing. Oh no.
Yeah. Right.
But I do like to keep it long enough so we can, people don't have to listen to the whole thing, but I love if they do, but long enough to where we can hit a wide variety of things. Because the whole point of this Off the Bandstand thing is that it's supposed to help people to, on the bandstand, people get to hear us play all the time, right? And they don't get to talk to us a lot afterwards, whether it's, because they're tired, they want to leave, or they don't stick around to the end, or, we're tired, and, after the gig. So this is a chance for people to get to know more about us as not only individuals, but the process behind what we do. So I like to have it long enough just so people can have the opportunity to get to know us more, and we'll definitely have people back on as time goes by. But so anyways, to wrap up, we have like a few speed round questions. And the first one is, what are like some things that you enjoy doing outside of jazz as a way of like resting, recharge, rebuild, so that way you can go back? Because, the shed can be sometimes a very rewarding place, and it can be a very crippling place at the same time if we are, hitting a wall, which we do, on any given day or every couple of days, and we just have to like cut it off, don't think about music at all, even though we love it. It's our discipline. We're like, I don't want to think about any given note. Like, don't even speak on a certain pitch. Like, I don't want to hear it. So what are you doing like in other free time that helps you to kind of just take a breather and then go do this to fill your other part of your soul,
Well, I mean, I don't know if this gives me much of a breather, but not to speak too much about specifics here, but because I know you said this isn't a political podcast, but I've always followed. I've always followed politics fairly closely. You know, I try to keep up with the news and everything that's going on, which I think is heightened importance right now. Not just with the virus, but with all the I would argue very necessary protests that have gone on in the past couple months. And I think that helps to give a new spirit to what we as musicians and artists in general are doing by pursuing art and by creating in a moment like this, or in any moment that we find ourselves in. And also just very specifically talking about jazz, where the music comes from, which is the African American community. That it's the fight for justice is an ongoing fight. So it's something that I've personally, I haven't attended a protest myself just out of fears for my own health, but I certainly have been following all the protests and reading all the news about them that I can, and I would highly encourage everyone listening to do the same. In other areas, I guess I've been trying to just get outside safely, where as I can. I go on walks just around like parks and different parts of the city that have natural beauty, because Austin's a beautiful city. And I've always loved just getting to experience the wealth of lush greenery and terrain and lakes and everything that are surrounding us here. So I've definitely been trying to take some time to do that. That's definitely a great way to just take a breather and get your mind off things, because I don't know. I love just getting outside and doing that. It's a very easy way to exercise too. So
Stay in shape.
Absolutely.
Okay, real quick, what's if there was like one record, and another thing we're probably going to be doing on this, fingers crossed, is I'm going to have each guest put together a short or long Spotify playlist of like what they think is like, or just send them to me. I'll compile it. I'll put a link in every posting of each episode and be like, if you want to learn more about like what specifically influences them, go check out these. So if you had to say one record that you would encourage everybody to go check out, what's the one record?
One that I've been listening to recently, or just in general, I would encourage everyone to listen to.
Whatever you want, however you want to interpret it. Even if it's something that it's like over time or just right now, what's the record?
Yeah, I would say I can't think too much about it, can I? I would say it's kind of a corny name, but "Rock and Roll Baby" by the Stylistics. An album that just completely transformed the way I look at music and the steps I take as a composer and arranger in the last couple of years. Beautiful arrangements. Almost all the tunes are by Tom Bell, probably the king of Philly soul that no one's ever heard of, just because he wrote all these beautiful, lush tunes. He played keys on all of them. He arranged all of them. A man that deserves way more respect than he gets, I would argue. And of course, the vocalists in the Stylistics and Russell Tompkins specifically are also tremendous. So that would be the album for me.
Awesome, man. And then finally, this is the question we're ending every episode with. We as musicians have no shortage of crazy, outlandish, nightmarish gigs. And you don't have to say names. You don't have to say anything like that. You don't have to say where it was. You can give as many details as you want. Don't perjure yourself. But no.
Okay.
What's like the craziest gig story that you've had where it's just been like, oh my God, like nightmare fuel?
Well, I in trying to think about that, whenever someone asks me about that, I always just think of like, I call it a tale of two gigs. Whereas like one night about a year ago, like April of last year, I had, it was a Saturday night, and I was at the time playing with this group. I'll mention them by name. Big Wise Brass Band, terrific, funk brass band that I played with for some time. Most of the guys were UT students, and of course, like our audience was UT based. So like when we would play gigs, a lot of time it would be our friends from UT. And so this one gig was a co-op show. And it was at this, I won't say what co-op it was at.
Was it?
It wasn't the one you were at. It wasn't the one you were at. But, yeah. No, it was a different one. But I had never played at this co-op before. And it was packed. A fire marshal who saw that room would hide their face, weep, and quit the job. It was insanely packed in that room. There were several other very prominent bands within the UT community that were playing that night. TC Superstar was one of them. I think the other one was Indoor Creature. And so, just they all have very strong followings, and so the room was full completely. And the stage, as with any co-op, I mean, it's like a living area, basically. So we were lucky that they even had a stage installed. Sure. But it wasn't by no means built to support a 10-piece band like Big Wise, which is a 6-man horn line and then a 4-piece rhythm section. And so I'm up there on the stage, and everyone, well, not everyone, but people on and off the stage were on a different mental frequency that night. Let's say, and not me personally. I'm too chicken to do any of that stuff. But
he's a good boy.
What?
I said he's a good boy. Everyone knows Thomas Wenglinski is a good boy.
Yeah. Well, anyway, but yeah, and so I was, and I my keyboard at the time, which you don't know this, but I've actually replaced with the newest model, but it was a beautiful Korg SV1 that I was using on all of my gigs. It did everything I wanted it to. It was this old, beautiful keyboard with all these great patches and everything. And in a room that packed, people are spilling things all around you and bumping into you, and I was just like, please don't knock over this, many $1,000 piece of equipment, and it's just mayhem. And personally, the bassist who was subbing with us that night got a friend to record the entire set, and I listened back to it afterwards, and I thought my playing that night was some of the best I'd ever played with that band. Even though I was just like really frantic, but in any case, we played a half an hour longer than we were supposed to. We played about an hour and a half long set. By the time we finished, it was well after 1 a.m. I pack up my stuff. I get out of there. My skin is coated in about 3 or 4 layers of sweat. I was probably wearing, this shirt or something like this. And I run home, throw all my stuff down, fall into bed, go to sleep. The next morning, I wake up at like 7. I don't remember where this gig was, but it was some brunch gig that started at like 10 or 11. Maybe it was Juliet or something like that. I just don't know. But it was a trio gig. And, suddenly I'm playing with, like a couple older musicians who don't necessarily go to co-op parties.
Sure.
And we're just, we're like, I'm just like, can we play Stella? And they're like, sure, let's play Stella. And we played Stella. And it just two completely different sides of being a musician in Austin, I would say.
Yeah.
And both of equal potential for enjoyment. The co-op shows or just anything that's that intense really pushes you to, it serves as a way of testing your stamina.
Yeah.
And sort of pushing you to the highest level of energy and output that you as a musician can offer. Because people are screaming all around you, and
Sure.
it's just a crazy time. and then, but then the next day at a trio gig, where you're just playing at some restaurant with a couple, with a bassist and a drummer, and you're just calling tunes and just, that's like, that's where new ideas for me come from. And it's also just a great way we're basically just socializing with each other for a couple hours, at least if everyone has the right attitude about it. And, I find both types of gigs to be equally formative and productive and fun. So yeah, that's my story. It's not a single gig, but
No, man, it works though. It works. It's a great story. And yeah, I think that's that kind of packed room is anything that anyone ever needs to feel stressed. Because all musicians have had that situation where we're crammed in the corner at a steakhouse or something like that, and somebody comes in and they're a little they've had one too many, and it's a little scary. But man, it's great. Well, Thomas, this has been so much fun. It's so good to see you. Let's see each other very soon. Let's play together soon. Let's maybe do
absolutely
a little project, at least from a distance. In the meantime, maybe we'll throw it up at the end of this. Thank you for the excellent theme song. Ladies and gentlemen, Thomas Wenglinski, composer, arranger, big band writer, music producer extraordinaire. Thomas, do you have a website that you want to plug or anything, or Bandcamp?
Yeah, just look me up on Spotify. It's just my name, which displays here on Zoom. On Bandcamp, it's just thomaswenglinski.bandcamp.com. Yeah.
Cool. And then I'll put a link in there to your Spotify and to Watch the Moon. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, if you haven't heard Watch the Moon yet, as soon as you do, you will be given life. And the quarantine will have all been worth it for this one song that is healing in a 5-minute and 33-second track. So, Thomas, man, so much fun. So good to see you. Thanks for being on. We'll get this out real soon. And, I'll give you a call in the next couple of days.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Yeah.
See you. Peace.
See you.